Hey everyone, clarifying the language clarifies the mind. That's actually one of the biggest obstacles that we have to overcome if we're going to get ourselves in a proper place where we're talking about how governance run, how it plays out, and how it actually affects each and every one of us. When you hear the rhetoric espoused by those from the political or the ruling class or their media mouthpiece counterparts, they constantly talk about these things that we and they and government pays for this or government subsidizes that. In reality, that kind of talk, those kind of premises literally prevents each and every one of us from thinking critically about what that actually means. I'm just going to use this example of this CBC story to help clarify what I'm trying to say. And the headline for this particular story under the Indigenous file is Ottawa ordered to compensate First Nations children impacted by on-reserve child welfare system. Tribunal ordered Canada to enter into talks to determine compensation distribution. Who qualifies? It's being reported by Jorge Barrera, September 6, 2019. So like I say, the headline suggests that Ottawa has been ordered to compensate First Nations children that were impacted by on-reserve child welfare system. But Ottawa, what is Ottawa but a geographical landmass in Canada? The capital, the city. Who's paying? Ottawa doesn't represent people. Like I say, it's just a particular geographical landmass in Canada. So obviously they don't mean what? The soil, the grass, the trees. They're not saying those things are going to be forced to compensate these on-reserve children or those who are part and parcel or who were involved in the system. Nor are they referencing the politicians, whether you're talking the senators or the MPs or all the way up to the prime minister. Those people, as we already know, their very salaries, their paychecks come from redistribution of the wealth from the Canadian taxpayer. All of those people who work for government in some capacity get their income by way of forced wealth and income redistribution. That's right. I never signed any contract. And to pretend or suggest otherwise, well, that's, once again, you're playing in a realm of mysticism where you'll deny reality because it doesn't suit the ideology that's been jammed in your head. But the reality is that Canadians such as myself, I can't speak for everyone, but I have never agreed to allow anyone to plunder my income or take any portion of my salary or anything that I've done that has created a benefit economically for me. I have never agreed to allow anyone who claims to be part of government. I never give any of those people express permission or even implied permission to take any portion of my income. Never done it in my entire life, and I'm not about to do it now. Once again, that's just a reality. So really, when they're talking about Ottawa is ordered to pay, what they mean at the end of the day is you and I. We're the ones that's going to be forced to pay for this stuff. And did you have anything to do with it? I know I didn't. Obviously, I have nothing against these children, and I feel bad for whatever may have happened to them. But once again, why should I, as the Canadian taxpayer who had absolutely nothing to do with this, be forced to pay for the failures or the misdeeds of politicians in the past? That's the problem with big government having their grubby hands constantly in your back pocket or in your paycheck or in your purse. By sheer fact that there is a substantial portion of the Canadian population that fall for the nonsense that the political and ruling class have jammed in their head to tell them that they're basically just supposed to submit and conform to whatever the government suggests as a means or a reason why they want to take or plunder your economic prosperity or your income. The political class in this country are basically telling you whatever they decide, whatever they determine to be a worthy reason to forcefully take from your income, from your productive wealth, to use for whatever they see fit, they are saying that they are supposed to have unfettered access to do so. Well, especially they say if you vote on it. But once again, if I didn't vote for it, let's say a couple of my neighbors did. Well, why in this modern world of 2019, in the age of information, like I've said so many times before, why are people foolish or naive enough to believe that just because a couple of my neighbors decide that they want to go vote for a politician who's going to use that mystical gun in the room to take from me to pay for whatever they agree on? How did we get to this point today, Canada, where multiple generations believe in this kind of nonsense? Where it's legitimate, whether you're talking morals or ethics or even legally, where that's considered normal or legit to have this big, gigantic representation of a monopoly force of violence have carte blanche access to plunder and redistribute my income, all that I've worked for. To believe that someone in government has a higher claim to my income than I do is to suggest that I am a modern day slave. And you also must believe that you're a slave as well. Which I'll tell you, you might want to believe that, and if you do, shame on you. My problem is your belief in modern day slavery is causing a lot of economic harm for me. So it's vitally important for me to try to convince the population of this country to stop believing in that kind of mysticism and that kind of top-down authoritarianism as a means to an end. Because you're causing way more harm than you're doing good. Ottawa must pay potentially billions of dollars in compensation to First Nations children harmed by the on-reserve child welfare system, following a ruling Friday by the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal that also called for payments to some of their parents and grandparents. The tribunal ordered the federal government to pay $40,000 to each child, the maximum allowed under the Canadian Human Rights Act, who is apprehended or taken from their homes on reserve. What the reason? The ruling covers all children in the care of on-reserve child welfare system at any point from January 1st, 2006 to a date to be determined by the tribunal. Some estimates place the number of potentially affected children at about 50,000, with the largest proportion in the prairies in British Columbia. The ruling also covers First Nation children in the Yukon Territory. Folks, I'll place a link to this article in the description of the video below. Like I said, I didn't want to waste too much time on it, but I mean, once again, this is just another perfect example where, like I say, I'm trying to break people out of their indoctrinated mindset and believing that this is even remotely something that should be considered moral or ethical in any way. No, stealing from some people, like me as the average Canadian taxpayer, plundering my productivity and my income to pay for the misdeeds politicians or these people that were running these education institutions. No, like I said, hold those people to account. Stop forcing me for the misdeeds of things that I had nothing to do with. I mean, taxation is already theft. That's just the reality. And I get it. Like I say, a lot of Canadians were born and raised and indoctrinated ever since they were 4 or 5 years old in the education system to believe that no, taxation is theft. No, if someone comes at you with it and says that they're a politician or an MP or the Prime Minister or the Premier, they have some legitimate claim of authority over a portion of your income. Once again, you had, and you know, I mean, as an adult, you at least know, no matter where you are at in your psychology as far as understanding what freedom means, but you at least should know that that's some really messed up shit when you actually believe as an adult that someone has a higher claim of authority on your income than you do. I mean, you know, there's some really, really freaking messed up mental gymnastics that your brains had to go through to be hardwired to actually believe that nonsense. What I'm trying to do, what I try to do every day, and I'm going to continue to do every day going forward, or as often as I possibly can, is try to break more and more of the Canadian people's minds out of that indoctrinated mindset. Not only will that free their mind, but it'll also free up a lot of our income and our productive wealth that's constantly being plundered and redistributed by political edict or determined based solely on what these people that have been shown in the past, these politicians or these people that represent the ruling class in this country, they've shown time and time again, they fail all areas, all segments of the Canadian population in a myriad and multiple ways. But rather than, like I say, rather than being held to account personally for what they have done as individuals, no, they offload all that cost and responsibility onto you and I. Which, like I said, had absolutely nothing to do with it. Well, I can't speak for you, but I can speak for myself. Had nothing to do with this stuff. So why am I being forced, or like I say, at the current debt levels and deficits, as I've said this many times in the past too, maybe it's not even my paycheck. Maybe because the debts and deficits are so high, maybe it's the potential future paycheck of my son, or maybe my son's son or daughter, my grandkids, that'll end up being forced to pay for this stuff, which of course they had nothing to do with either. This is the problem with forced wealth and income redistribution, folks. And I know some people think it's a good thing because they feel like they benefit in some way. And maybe you do. But if that's where you're going with it, well, you're basically making the case for the common thief. And if you're trying to make the case for the common thief and you support theft, well then could you imagine if everyone else in this country believed the same as you? And acted out the same way these people who are part and parcel of the ruling class act out. Think of how much of a degradation. Think about how devastating the society you live in would be under that premise. Be thankful most of us have our own internal ethics and morality, fortunately, that we got elsewhere. Because it sure as shit didn't come from anyone who's part and parcel of the ruling class or your thought leaders or your opinion makers or those who represent the education system. I mean, there might be a small minority of them in the education system that try to go against or counter the status quo, but they're not the voice you're going to hear when articles such as this come out. No, you're going to get the exact kind of narrative, the exact same kind of message that's being presented here, which is government is this pretense of benevolence that's going to help out these poor kids that were treated terribly by what? Yet another governing institution or those who represent another governing institution, aka the education system, when in reality, all they're doing at the end of the day is taking from you to give to someone else. They're robbing Peter to pay Paul. And at the end of the day, I mean, seeing Paul receive that income, yeah, if you only focus on that frame, well, that probably looks good. And you can put a story or a narrative or a caption to that and say, oh, look at the benevolence. The problem is, if you haven't panned the camera to find out how that unfolded, or the person who had their economic prosperity or their income plundered to pay for that, well, then you're missing out the genuinely malevolent part of that equation, which is the fact that theft was the ultimate means to the end. It's Canadian Libertarian, and I love liberty.